the great I am.
Morning, everyone. Ooh, I got a little echo there. Well, good morning. Good to see all of you this morning. We are working with an amazing work called the Practical Metaphysics, a new insight and truth by one of Unity's most famous and one of the most well-loved authors, Eric Butterworth. And this week we're actually going to be discussing the metaphysics of prayer. And I came across this Pickles comic book. How many of you ever read Pickles comic book? It's a really cute comic book. The daughter basically says, what are you doing, Mom? And Mom says, well, I'm cross-stitching. I'm cross-stitching a prayer. And it's going to say, God grant me the senility to forget the people I never liked anyway, the good fortune to run into the ones I do like, and the eyesight to tell the difference. Well, you may wonder, well, what does that got to do with metaphysics of prayer? But a big part of it is eyesight, is being able to see. It's a part of our awareness of our vision and how we see things and how we see ourselves and how we see life and how we see the world. Came across another wonderful quote from Saint Teresa of Avila, a beautiful mystic, who said that from silly devotions and from sour-faced saints, good Lord, deliver us. So prayer oftentimes is thought to be this somber kind of, almost to me at times morose way of begging and beseeching this something out there to change. We have a tendency to believe that if we pray enough, that something out there will change. And that's really the primary reason why most of us pray, is to get something out there to change. And one of the things we are looking at in terms of an understanding from a metaphysical perspective of prayer is that prayer is not some ritual, it's not just some words that we say, and it's not just, even for that matter, just a particular spiritual practice, although there's value in those, and can be value in those, if we don't lose sight of the purpose of those rituals, and we don't lose sight of the purpose of the words that we say. And the purpose of the words that we say and the purpose of the rituals, and sometimes, in many spiritual arenas, people will light candles, or there are ways that some people think you have to be on your knees in order to do it. But in reality, all of those are for the purpose of helping us to really look at what's going on in us. But we have a tendency to do just the opposite when we pray. We have a tendency to be praying to something. And one of the things that we're looking at in terms of a metaphysical understanding is prayer really is not so much a praying to a God or a being out there as it is a way of connecting with and really aligning ourselves with and becoming in tune with the divinity that is everywhere present and is no more or less present out there than it is in here. But that you and I, the way that we can most effectively connect with that divine creative power of Spirit, of God, is really from within. And it really does begin and start from within. And so prayer really ultimately is for the purpose of us connecting with something that we're actually in consciousness that we're already connected with. We can't get out of it. Believe it or not, there's actually no escape from God. You are in it. Paul said we live and move and have our being in God. And we have a tendency, though, to believe on some level that God is still something out there. And so part of our work in prayer is to really reconnect with this consciousness that really does see and know that we are not just separate things out here from the divine, but the divine is actually a part of our very nature. is at the essence of who and what we truly are in life. And so prayer is a way of really reconnecting that and then allowing that to be envisioned and to be manifest out into our experiences in the world. We'll talk a little bit later about meditation and prayer. And so meditation really is a way of us really moving back into an alignment with the divine nature. And prayer is a way of taking that alignment and that consciousness that comes from that alignment and then allowing that to be manifest and expressed out into the world. That's how I understand, and that's what Eric Butterworth is really explaining part of the difference, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I want to invite you to do a little exercise with me this morning. So would you guys be willing to stand up for a minute and make a circle? And we're going to do this kind of quickly. Just make a circle around the room. Do a little experiment here today. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is actually hold hands. So you need to be touching skin to skin. So, everybody touching skin to skin? All right, Sam, I'm going to ask you to touch the end of that for me. Up to see the silver part? Touch the silver part right around the side. Wow. This man's powerful. Now, if you will, take that and hand it over to Julie over there, and you hold the silver part on this side. And actually, you and I are going to need to... Yeah, there we go. Now watch. Hold your finger out, Sam. No. I just wanted to give you an example that we really are all, whether we realize it or not, a part of an amazing connection. But this is our practice of prayer, of really consciously making that connection so that that light of spirit shows up for us in life. That's what happens. So,
oh, wait, Julie took her hand off, too.
So everybody hold your hand. Now, Alexa, just let go.
No, hold it, Julie. Keep holding it.
Isn't that interesting?
Oh, my goodness.
So our prayer work is really to remind ourselves, one, that, first of all, the energy and the electricity that is flowing through us is always present. It's always here. But when we do anything to separate ourselves and our thinking and our belief systems from that, we're not allowing that energy to flow in and through our lives in such a way that the light shines in the world, that the Spirit shines in the world. Okay, have a seat. Thank you. I love little object lessons, so. So from a metaphysical perspective of prayer, it's important to begin to recognize and begin to develop an understanding that we're not praying to something out there, that we are allowing ourselves to align ourselves with a knowing, just as Jesus Christ had an awareness of his oneness with that divine, you and I have that oneness as well. He said, the things that I have done, ye shall do also, and even greater things. And so it's not so much, and actually, think about this, a lot of times people will see Jesus as the one and only Son of God, but in unity we understand that the Son of God is that divine nature that is within every one of us. And Jesus came to show us that, to demonstrate that, to live from that place. And he did that in a way where he recognized and he was in tune with and connected with an understanding of his oneness with the divine and his oneness with all of creation. And so part of our work in terms of prayer is to begin to recognize that prayer is not a way of trying to get something out here to do something for us to change what's going on out here in the world. The purpose of prayer is not to change. See, interestingly enough, and Eric talks about this, is that prayer doesn't change God in any way. You realize that? There's not some being out there that we pray to that then he says, oh yeah, you've been a good little boy or girl, so here, I'll give you a treat. It doesn't work that way. The divine is always there, present and working and creating whatever is going on in and through us in our lives. And it is not just out there, it is something that works through our consciousness. Now, consciousness is a big word that we use, but it's our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes, our belief systems, our perceptions, our perspective. It's not only the way that we see the world, but it is the consciousness that we see the world through. It is the perceptions and the eye that we see life through. And so a big part of prayer is really tuning our consciousness to an understanding of the presence of the divine, not as something that changes our circumstances, but something that changes us in our circumstances. And when we really tune into an understanding of prayer, we are allowing something within us to transform our limited way of seeing and thinking so that we have a grander, bigger awareness and picture of the possibilities, even in what seem like difficult or challenging or harmful circumstances. We're able to see more of the presence. And we then are able to, we're given awareness and insight and guidance on steps that we can take, or we just see it differently and we don't worry about it anymore. It's something that is no longer a problem. Interestingly enough, problems show up when we take our finger off of the person next to us, or we take our finger off that connection that we have to life and to the divine. And so a big part of prayer has to do with really setting in an awareness of, as Scripture, as the Psalm says, be still and know that I am God. So the first step really in prayer is that be still. So there's a place within us where we can truly tune into a place of calm, of centeredness, of stillness. And when we tune into that, there is an awareness, a consciousness, and a knowing that comes forth. Some call it a still small voice, and sometimes it's heard as a voice, and sometimes it's simply a knowing, an awareness, and sometimes it's simply an insight or an idea, or we call them divine ideas, which are really ideas that are beyond a limited perspective of awareness or understanding, but really in tune with the greater qualities and the greater reality of truth of spirit. And so our practice really in going into that place of stillness is really to allow the mind chatter, the monkey mind, which we all have. Anybody know what I'm talking about when I say monkey mind? We all do, because it's going on right now, whether we realize it or not. There's a little voice inside. There's a chatter going on. There are all these different thoughts. There's, some of you are actually already cooking lunch or getting ready to eat or whatever. It's like we're either that or you're thinking about what happened when you came in. So we're either in the past or in the future. But it's learning to be present here and now in an awareness of who and what we truly are, which is the I am. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. There is no separation. There's nothing that is keeping you from being in and as and of the presence of this amazing creative power and force and energy that is the divine, other than our own thoughts and feelings and attitudes and belief system. And so part of the work of prayer is to really realign our thinking and our feeling and our understanding so that we truly can begin to get a greater sense of our identity as spiritual beings, as that I am, as that divine nature. And when we do, we take the time then to listen. We listen to that still small voice that will give us some insight or awareness or guidance about the greater possibilities of good that can come forth. And when we listen, then we begin to not only align ourselves with the connection that we have with the divine in us, but we begin to recognize and see and connect with the divine in those around us, in the world. And we actually are able to then even connect with and begin to understand that whatever circumstance is going on out here in life, whether it be something that's wonderful or something that's challenging or troubling, that the presence of the divine is in that as much as anywhere else in the world. If we can really begin to see and begin to open to the possibility of there's a greater good here, there is the presence of the divine here, just as much as there is a presence of the divine over here. But I happen to like this better, so I'm going to hang out over here, right? But in reality, if you are in a place where you are confronted with difficulties. Anybody have any difficulty in your life? Nobody has any of that, right? Well, you see, interestingly enough, those challenges and difficulties, whether we understand or realize them or not, they're not there to punish us. This is a traditional separation way of thinking. There is somehow this being out there that, we didn't say our prayers correctly, or we didn't get on our knees before we got in bed at night, and therefore we're getting punished for not being, quote, a good person. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. The reality is you are created in the image and after the likeness of the divine, and so you are innately, inherently good. You can't help that. Do you do things that tend to enhance a belief, an idea, a feeling of separation from that? Of course. We all go unconscious. We become unconscious of our unique divine nature. And in that unconsciousness, we think and say and do things that are not in alignment with this awareness of our true divine nature. And so, if we stay in that place, we're going to then manifest and create experiences out here in the world that are going to reflect that back to us. See, the world is our mirror. What we see out here is really a reflection of the consciousness that's going on in our thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and beliefs. Now, if you don't believe that, that's okay, because you're going to create that kind of experience also. It'll just seem like nonsense to you. And you create that kind of awareness as well. But when you begin to recognize that something out here is actually reflecting something going on inside of you, and you begin to be open to the possibility that prayer is a way of not necessarily changing something or someone out here. We especially like to change someone. I don't know if you guys probably have someone in mind that you really like to pray for, right? But in reality, true prayer, metaphysical prayer, a prayer from an understanding of the truth of nature and of the divine, is not about trying to get someone else to be the way we think they're supposed to be. It's really not even, for that matter, trying to get us to be the way we think we're supposed to be, because it's kind of beyond the thinking process. It's involved, the thinking process is involved in it, but it's not what we think. Interestingly enough, one of my favorite bumper stickers I've seen is, meditation is not what you think. Well, prayer is the same way. Prayer is not what you think. Although thinking is involved and influenced and what's the word I'm looking for? It is characterized by our thoughts, and our thoughts are characterized by our consciousness. And so one of the things Eric says is prayer is not something that you learn to do, like learning to drive a car or learning to type or even working crossword puzzles. He says a little girl once was in the company of her family, and she was invited to come and say her prayers in front of the group. And she said, "Now I lay me down to sleep," and did her little prayer that she did at night, of course. And they all said, "Oh, that's wonderful. You just say your prayer so nicely." And she said, "Well, you should hear me gurgle." Well, it's kind of like this idea that somehow that prayer is something that you have to do or show, or there's a show that's involved in it in some way. And the reality is, it's not something that you need to, it's not a practice per se, as much as it is an awareness of being connected. Connected, just like we saw in that little experiment that we did. One of the things Eric says is really kind of interesting to me. He says that we have a tendency to pray to God. And he says there's a little problem in that. Because it's making an assumption that you're here and that God is over there. Or up there. And that's still a belief in separation. Some people pray to Buddha. Some people pray to Jesus. And there's nothing wrong with that except that it still is enhancing this belief system that there's still something out there as opposed to recognizing that there's something in here that we need to connect with. And so there's nothing wrong with doing that other than the fact that it actually is reinforcing this sense of separation. We're actually going to sing a song later. I was tickled, I don't know, but I wanted you to sing it anyway because I knew it would be perfect for what we were doing here today. So, and here's the thing about prayer. Prayer is a way of, Jesus said, whatever things you ask in prayer, believing you have received, you will receive. And so Eric talks a little bit about this idea of asking. Well, if we ask, what are we asking of, and who are we asking, and all of that. So one of the things he points out is that the word that has been translated as ask really more effectively is translated as the word claim. When you claim, whatever you claim as reality for you is reality for you. Let me say that again. And so when you are praying, it's not a matter of asking to get something. It is actually a matter of really owning and accepting a truth that already exists. And so when you have a desire in your heart of something, of experiencing more abundance in your life, or experiencing more health, or experiencing more love, it's not that you're trying to get something. It's basically a sense of accepting and owning the understanding that it already exists for you. And the more you can tune into that knowing of it, then it becomes more of an experience out here in the world. And so you begin by owning it as an experience within yourself. One of the exercises that I like to take people through when I think about prayer is really beginning to practice that the prayer is already answered. Because in reality, in truth, it already is. In spirit, it already is answered. Because the divine is already the fulfillment of that prayer. Because ultimately, everything that you think you want, everything that you desire in experience in life, is really a greater experience of the presence of the divine in a form that you have put on it, in a shape that you cut out with your scissors of your mind, and you said, this is the good that I want in my life. And the good that I want in my life looks like this. And if it doesn't show up that way, then there's no good in my life. But it's important to recognize what we're doing is we are outlining how that good is supposed to show up. How many of you ever prayed for something and just prayed and prayed and prayed, and then something better came along? That's one of the reasons why we always say in unity, this or something better. We pray for something specific. Sure, we create an image or a form of what it is that we want to see and experience in our life and world, and we see it as though it is already so. But the moment that we become attached to it showing up in that form, we're actually no longer praying. We're actually we're actually separating. And so what we're doing is we're praying more we're putting more energy into the absence of it, of the divine, than we are in the presence of the divine. Follow me? And so part of our work is to begin to shift our consciousness and our awareness in such a way that we are not practicing praying to something or asking for something, but really accepting the awareness of the good as it is right now. And one of the things, I was actually having a conversation with our prayer chaplain this morning, Russell, and one of the things that came back to me is this understanding that we set clear intentions of what it is that we want to experience in our life, in our prayers. It's important to do that. It's important to be clear about what you want. But it's 100% intention and zero attachment. Let me say that again, 100% intention and zero attachment. And what we have a tendency to do is set an intention and get really attached to it showing up in exactly the way we think it's supposed to. And then, therefore, if it doesn't show up in the way we think it's supposed to, well, this prayer stuff doesn't work. What's the point? That's how our mind works. That's how the ego consciousness works. If it doesn't show up the way I think it's supposed to, what's the point? When we actually are probably about just this far from really having something amazing happen for us that maybe even incredibly significantly more than what we had envisioned the good being. Because there's a greater possibility of good than you and I have imagined. And so it doesn't mean that we don't use the power of our imagination to then think about and focus on and get clear with what it is that we hope to and want and desire in our lives, but we don't become attached. See, attachment, interestingly enough, is a fear of not getting what it is that you desire. When you become attached to something, it's because you're afraid you're not going to get it. So you got to fight even more for it. You got to put more energy into it. You got to struggle. You got to do all your rituals, light more candles. And then you're attached. You're attached to it showing up the way you think it's supposed to be. Rather than simply allowing the Spirit of the Divine to work through you in a way that will either bring that something that you've imagined. Sometimes it happens that it comes through very clearly in the way that you've envisioned it. But oftentimes it comes in a way that is a little bit different perhaps than what you had thought. And so the allowing is being open to understanding that there's something better, something higher, something greater at work. And part of our work is to let go of our negating consciousness, Eric Butterworth calls it. Our negating consciousness is that part of us that basically is arguing against and saying it's the doubts and the if-onlys. And if we can begin to corral those in and began to bless them and release them and hold an understanding of what Eric calls a yes consciousness. A yes consciousness is simply being yes to Spirit, yes to something greater, yes to something more, yes to the divine power that works in and through us. And so we tune into that place within us that is the place of stillness. We listen for the inspiration, the guidance, the divine ideas, the greater possibilities, the steps that are ours to take. We make those steps, and then we say yes to whatever the universe is bringing into our experience from that place. To me, that's the real true power of metaphysical prayer. And there is a great way of working with this that can really transform not only it doesn't immediately transform our world. But the moment that we begin to transform within ourselves and we allow that practice of prayer to transform our consciousness, we become the light of the world. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine so that men may see the glory of God." And part of the work of prayer is staying connected, like we did in this exercise. And when we find ourselves in those times and circumstances where, you see, the problems are when we let go. The problems are when we are in the circle and the little tube is lighting up. Interestingly enough, you can make that do it yourself. When the energy is flowing, you're in light with the Spirit. And when you are letting go of connection, either within yourself or out in the world, that's where the problems are. That's where they show up. So our work is not to necessarily try and get the world to change. It's just simply to reconnect and be that light in the circumstance, in the situation. That's what the circumstance is calling for. That's what the challenge is calling for. It's calling for you. It wouldn't be in your life if it wasn't calling for you. It's calling for you to show up as who you truly are. The I am, the light of the world. So how many are willing to step into that? Are you willing to step into that knowing that this is here because it's calling me to be who I truly am? That's our homework for this week and probably the rest of our lives. Have fun with it. Let's move into our meditation time. Just breathing into that space within you of stillness, of silence, allowing all things of the mind chatter to just simply be there, bless it, and returning to the heart center in that stillness and silence. We listen. We listen not just with our ears, we listen with our heart. And we allow that still small voice, whether it be in words or pictures or feelings or just awareness, to reveal to us an even richer, fuller assurance and knowing of who and what we are and what is ours to be and do in the silence. In the silence. Let a feeling and awareness of gratitude come into your heart. Just allow gratitude to rise up within you. Because we know it's in a place of gratitude that we can truly sense more of the grace, the presence. And it's not gratitude for something that's happened, it's just a gratitude, a feeling, an energy, a consciousness. And so just feel it. And this helps to create the conditions that make positive results inevitable, that make positive experiences unfold. And it's a way of acknowledging the energy, the power, the presence, and the activity of Spirit. Just by feeling grateful. Let your heart be filled with that feeling and that energy. And know that there's a power at work to unfold even more experiences in life for you that will reflect back that energy of gratitude and for you to be grateful for. And so take a nice deep breath now. And holding that energy and that feeling of gratitude, let your awareness be back in this room, this time and place. Let that energy of gratitude radiate out into this room, to those around you, to this wonderful space that we're in. Let it emanate out into the world. And know that you are letting your light shine. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. Be present here and now. And so it is.